The garden at Primavera Farm had been transformed into an open-air party hall. Arrangements of wildflowers decorated the makeshift altar beneath an ancient almond tree, while the path leading there was covered in colorful petals. Laura Noguera, 43, took a deep breath before crossing the threshold. Her champagne lace dress contrasted with the bouquet of lavender and fresh herbs in her hands. Beside her, firmly holding her arm, was Antonio Martins, 45, in a light-colored suit. As they walked, he delicately felt the air in front of him with his free hand, guiding himself by sound and scent, his movements revealing the blindness that had befallen him 7 years earlier. The guests watched the couple with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. The whispers began immediately. "It's a shame. She could have anyone," a woman muttered from behind a fan. A distant aunt, sitting in the third row, spoke without lowering her voice. "She is wasting everything she has built out of pity. For a poor man who can't even see his own face in the mirror." In the front row, Laura's older sister, Helena, wore a stony expression. There was no smile on her face, just rigid lines of disapproval. Laura listened to everything. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she felt Antonio's fingers gently squeeze hers, hands calloused from constant contact with the earth. When they reached the altar, the celebrant began the ceremony by speaking about unity, respect, and true love. Antonio stood erect, dignity evident in every line of his body. As they said their vows, his voice never wavered, even when muffled laughter erupted after he mentioned seeing the true meaning of love. What no one there imagined was that this marriage, apparently motivated by pity, would hide secrets, hidden talents, and transformations that would change not only their lives, but the entire surrounding community, and that it would take 10 long months for the full truth to come out. Laura wasn't always the successful businesswoman everyone knew. She started out as an assistant in a small flower shop while studying agronomy. Her unwavering determination took her from assistant to owner of Jardins Vivos, the largest corporate landscaping company in the region. The cost of this success, however, was high. A disastrous engagement in her youth had left deep scars. Since then, Laura had dedicated every waking moment to the company, filling her solitude with busy schedules and professional recognition. Few knew the Laura who would cry silently upon witnessing a perfect sunset or an exceptional floral arrangement. This vulnerability was carefully concealed beneath the persona of a pragmatic and unwavering businesswoman. Antonio had entered her life 6 months earlier, when Laura was visiting a rare plant nursery. She had watched, intrigued, as a man wearing sunglasses delicately touched the leaves of several plants, smelling them intensely. "Antonio is our special consultant," the owner explained. "He lost his sight in an accident, but he has developed other senses extraordinarily. He can identify diseases in plants before they even show visible signs." Over the next few months, they met regularly. Laura discovered in Antonio not only a plant expert, but also someone who understood her on a level no one else had ever achieved. When Antonio proposed during a stroll through an herb garden, Laura didn't hesitate. For the first time in decades, she felt she had found someone with whom she could share not only her professional passion, but also her vulnerability. The engagement announcement was met with shock and barely concealed concern. "You barely know him," some argued. "He's clearly interested in your money," others insinuated. "It's a phase, a midlife crisis," Helena declared flatly. What Laura didn't realize was that by making this choice, she would be challenging not only prejudices, but also the hidden ambitions and interests of those close to her. The first week of marriage was barely over when the trouble began. Laura arrived at the office to find a memo. Special board meeting, 10 a.m., attendance required. Deborah Mendez, her 34-year-old minority partner, was already in the meeting room when Laura walked in. Beside her were 3 of the company's key investors and the company's lawyer. "Laura, I called this meeting because serious concerns have arisen about the future of the company," Deborah began in a falsely cordial tone. "What kind of worries?" "Frankly, your marriage has raised questions about your judgment. Clients are concerned, partners are hesitant, and we need to discuss how this affects our corporate image." Laura felt cold sweat running down the back of her neck, despite the air conditioning. "3 important contracts are under review," one of the investors interjected, sliding documents. "Centro Empresarial Colina is considering canceling the main gardens project. Incorporadora Alvarada has suspended negotiations, and..." Shopping Meridiano is requesting additional guarantees. Questionable personnel decisions by the main owner are directly affecting our credibility in the market, Deborah continued. We need to discuss measures to minimize the damage. The meeting lasted 3 tense hours. Laura had managed to postpone any drastic decisions, but she knew she was facing not only external prejudices, but also an internal battle for control of everything she had built. When he arrived home, he found Antonio in the garden, examining newly arrived lavender seedlings. "Tough day?" he asked as soon as he heard her footsteps. "How do you always know? Your breathing changes when you're tense, and your steps become firmer as if you're marching into battle." He smiled, touching her face gently. "Want to tell me?" Laura hesitated. "I'm dealing with some challenges at work. Because of us," he added. "Laura, I knew this would happen. People fear what they don't understand, and our marriage defies convention." His understanding intensified his concern. Antonio deserved more than to be seen as a problem to be managed. "We'll get through this together," she promised. The Colina Business Center was Jardines Vivos' calling card. The possibility of losing this contract would be a devastating blow. On Thursday, Laura decided to address the situation head-on. She invited the center's operations manager to a meeting on site and brought Antonio. That afternoon, the manager, Carlos Ribeiro, watched them with a skeptical expression, especially watching Antonio touch plants and inhale deeply near the foliage. As Mr. Ribeiro explained, the seasonal revitalization project we proposed includes strategic replacement of only 15% of the species, Laura explained. Suddenly, Antonio interrupted, kneeling next to a seemingly healthy raffia palm. "How long have you noticed the yellowing at the base of these leaves?" he asked, gently touching the plant. Carlos looked confused. "Yellowing? Our gardeners didn't report anything unusual, because it's not yet visible to the naked eye," Antonio explained. "But the odor is there, and the texture of the lower leaves is already starting to change." He brought a leaf to his nose. "It's Phytophthora palmivora, a fungus that attacks the plant's vascular system. If not treated immediately, within 3 weeks the fungus will spread to adjacent palm trees," Antonio continued. "And within approximately 2 months, 70% of the large palm trees will be affected." Laura suggested, "Why don't we do a lab test to confirm?" 3 days later, the results confirmed it. Phytophthora palmivora, exactly as Antonio had diagnosed. Centro Empresarial Colina not only maintained the contract, but expanded its scope to include a preventative monitoring system. At the company, employees who had previously murmured about the boss's strange marriage now watched Antonio with genuine curiosity. Deborah, however, seemed less than pleased with the turnaround. During a meeting, when Laura suggested bringing Antonio on as a special consultant, the partner barely managed to hide her displeasure. "We need to be careful not to turn a lucky coincidence into a corporate policy," she argued. "Diagnoses based on smelling plants hardly constitute standardized professional procedures." Laura then understood that she had won a battle, but the war for her husband's respect and the integrity of her company was just beginning. May was approaching, bringing preparations for the Centennial Flower Festival, a bicentennial tradition celebrating the legacy of pioneering horticultural families. For companies in the sector, the festival represented the ultimate opportunity to showcase their expertise. This year, however, Laura encountered unexpected resistance. Regular suppliers suddenly claimed to be out of stock. Artisans who produced decorative elements were inexplicably committed to other projects. "It's a veiled boycott," concluded Marcelo, project manager at Jardins Vivos. Since his marriage, doors that once opened automatically now need to be forced open. The next morning, over coffee with Antonio, she finally shared her concerns. "I'm having trouble with the festival. It seems our marriage is causing more professional resistance than I anticipated. What do you plan to do?" he asked without self-pity or offer of withdrawal. "I don't know yet. For the first time in my career, my connections seem insufficient. What if we approach the festival in a completely different way?" he suggested. "A garden that challenges the very notion of what constitutes scenic beauty. A garden designed not just to be seen, but to be experienced with all the senses." At the planning meeting the next morning, Laura made the announcement. "For this year's Centennial Flower Festival, I propose that our project be led by Antonio Martins." The silence that followed Laura's announcement was thick. 20 faces stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. You want a blind man to lead the design of our garden for the most important festival of the year? Deborah was the first to speak. Exactly, Laura confirmed. Antonio has unique qualifications for the concept we intend to develop. What concept would that be? Asked Marcelo. A complete sensory garden, she explained. A space designed to engage all the senses, not just sight. As Laura detailed the concept, she noticed mixed reactions from the Yao team. Some looked skeptical, others seemed intrigued. That's interesting in theory, admitted a junior designer, but we only have 6 weeks until the festival. Completely changing our approach now is extremely risky. Not to mention it's never been done before, Deborah added. Risking our reputation on an untested experiment led by someone with no proven track record. The discussion became heated, with the team splitting into factions. By the end of the meeting, at least 5 employees threatened to resign if the project went ahead as proposed. You're risking everything, Marcelo warned later. Not just the festival, but the entire company. We will not fail, Laura replied with conviction. I trust in Antonio's talent. When he officially informed the festival's organizing committee that Jardins Vivos would be presenting a sensory garden designed by Antonio, the reactions were even more intense. One committee member even called personally to confirm that there had been no errors in the documentation. At home, Laura found Antonio in the adapted office they had created for him, where he was working on tactile plans. How was it? He asked. Exactly as we expected. Resistance, disbelief, some people betting against us. And you're scared, he observed. Terrified, Laura admitted, but also strangely alive. What Laura didn't reveal was that she had received a call from Helena. A much more personal and painful campaign was just beginning. Sunday dinner at the Noguera family home had been an unbreakable tradition for decades. Laura and Antonio showed up to the family dinner prepared for the confrontation. Laura, I'm so glad you came, Helena greeted at the door, her tone falsely cordial. Laura's kiss was quick and dry. Antonio's was just a nod. In the living room, cousins, aunts, and nephews were chatting, the atmosphere visibly tense. The conversations quieted down when they entered. So, this is the famous husband, Aunt Berenice commented. Very brave of you, dear, to go through with such a public ceremony. The wedding was wonderful, Aunt, Laura replied quickly. Antonio and I appreciate your presence. Your sister has been keeping us updated on your latest projects. Very audacious, putting someone with your limitations to lead something as visual as a garden. Antonio smiled serenely. Limitations are often more in the eye of the beholder than in the capabilities of the doer. Don't you think, madam? During dinner, Helena commanded the table like a general on a battlefield, directing the conversation to topics that highlighted the challenges Laura would face. I'd like to propose a toast, Helena announced, to my younger sister, always so determined to follow her own path. May this new project be a valuable lesson. After dinner, while Antonio was talking to some nephews, Helena pulled Laura into the office. This has to stop, he declared as soon as he closed the door. You're clearly in a midlife crisis. What decisions would those be exactly? Laura asked. This absurd marriage to begin with, and now putting your company at risk. Helena pulled out a folder. I spoke with Dr. Mendez, our lawyer. There are grounds for annulment, you know? Laura stared at her sister in disbelief. Are you serious? You want to annul my marriage? I want to protect you. This man is taking advantage of your loneliness and financial success. And when he destroys your professional reputation, who will be there to pick up the pieces? Me, as always. Helena, I appreciate your concern, but my marriage is not up for discussion, nor are my professional decisions. If I can't offer support, I just ask that you respect my choices. You will regret this, Helena warned. And when that day comes, I hope you have the humility to admit I was right. Laura, we need to talk. Marcelo's urgent voice over the phone at 6 a.m. rarely meant good news. What happened? The plans for the sensory garden have been leaked. They're everywhere. Social media, specialist blogs, and the reaction isn't good. After hanging up, Laura rushed to her laptop. What she found made her stomach sink. Specialized blogs published headlines like Jardins Vivos bets on questionable innovation, and when inclusion becomes a publicity stunt. An influential critic had written an article titled, the trend of forced inclusion, when companies use disability as a marketing strategy. Even more devastating, the leak included internal information, details that only someone with access to the company's confidential files could have. When he arrived at the office, he found Deborah waiting. "We need to talk about a damage control strategy," the partner announced. "The sponsors are in a panic, 3 clients have canceled meetings, and the festival committee is considering denying our application." "Who did this, Deborah?" Laura asked directly. "Who had access to the complete plans?" "This is not the time for a witch hunt," Deborah replied, looking away. "We need to focus on mitigating the damage." "And how do you suggest we do that?" "Back to the original concept. We announced that the sensory garden was just a conceptual study, not the final design. Suppliers who were reluctant will come back when they hear we've abandoned this experiment." "We're not going back," Laura finally declared. "The sensory garden is still our project." "Laura, be reasonable. Have you seen what they're saying? This will destroy everything we've built." That night, when he returned home, he found Antonio in his office. "I'm sorry you're going through this because of me," he said. "It's not your fault," Laura replied. "We're not giving up. In fact, we're doubling down." That's when he first noticed the shelves filled with notebooks next to Antonio's desk. Approaching them, he realized they were covered in small raised dots, Braille writing. "What are all these notebooks?" he asked. "My research. I've been documenting observations of plants, experiments with combinations based on chemical compatibility of aromas, theories about plant communication, just personal notes." "How long have you been keeping these records?" "Since the accident. When I lost my sight, I began to notice patterns, connections that I never noticed when I relied primarily on vision." The next morning, Laura used a Braille translator on her tablet to convert Antonio's notebooks into readable text. What emerged left her astonished. These were not simple notes, but methodical records of sophisticated research, groundbreaking botanical theories, and carefully documented experiments. "Antonio, this is incredible. You've been doing serious scientific research for years." "Not exactly scientific research. I have no formal academic training in botany, just personal observations. Methodically documented observations, with controls, isolated variables, and quantified results. This is legitimate science. I tried to share some ideas with university researchers years ago," he admitted. "I was politely ignored. One professor even suggested that my hobby was inspiring, but not suitable for serious academic consideration. These notebooks are a game changer," she declared. "We're not just creating a sensory garden through inclusion. We're applying innovative botanical theories." Over the next few days, Laura immersed herself in Antonio's recordings, translating and organizing them. The concept evolved from a simple sensory experience to a veritable living laboratory where visitors could experience concepts such as chemical conversations between plants and biologically grounded aromatic harmonies. On the designated festival site, the first preparation work began under Antonio's direct supervision. The location wasn't ideal, a space away from the main entrance, clearly designed to minimize the impact of the eccentric project. Laura watched with growing admiration as Antonio worked with the small team, teaching them to feel the soil, to identify tension in newly transplanted plants, to recognize subtle signs of stress or adaptation. "Touch here," he instructed a young landscaper, guiding his hand to the base of a seedling. "Feel how the temperature is slightly warmer than the surrounding soil? This indicates early water stress." The boy, initially skeptical, widened his eyes when he noticed the subtle difference. "How can you detect that?" "Practice," Antonio replied. "When we lose a sense, we don't gain superpowers. We just learn to pay attention to what was always there, but ignored." The sensory garden gradually took shape. Winding paths created aromatic journeys, areas of botanical textures invited touch, and strategically placed fountains generated sounds that interacted with the rustling of specific foliage. Tensions within the team eased as skeptics watched Antonio's meticulous method produce tangible results. "In 20 years of working in the field, I've never seen anything like this," confessed Teresa, a veteran landscaper who had initially threatened to quit. "He sees things I would never consider, even with perfect vision." Young João, recently graduated and initially the most vocal opponent of the project, now constantly followed Antonio, documenting his observations. He's teaching me to feel the pulse of plants, João explained enthusiastically. I've always treated them as decorative objects, not as living organisms with their own language. The intense summer that had marked the wedding gave way to a milder autumn. The trees turned golden, creating a contrast with the perennials in the sensory garden. Nocturnal plants are often overlooked in traditional gardens because their main characteristic, their scent, only manifests itself after most visitors have left, Antonio explained to the team. We are creating a space that celebrates qualities beyond the purely visual. Laura noticed an unfamiliar woman following the explanation with evident interest. Tall, with short gray hair and practical clothes, she took occasional notes. Can I help you? Laura asked. Dr. Sofia Mendonça, the stranger introduced herself. A botanist from the Federal University. I'm in town for the International Conference on Urban Biodiversity, but I heard about this project and decided to check it out for myself. What kind of comments? Some were quite derogatory. Colleagues ridiculed the idea of a garden designed by someone with no vision. I found the prejudice so blatant that I became curious. And I'm impressed. What your husband just explained about chemical communication between compatible and incompatible species is exactly what we've been researching in our lab for the past 3 years. The associations he intuitively proposed align perfectly with our data on mycorrhizal networks. After observing a few more demonstrations, the scientist asked to be formally introduced to Antonio. The conversation that followed was a revelation. Antonio and Dr. Sofia quickly delved into a technical discussion about the volatilization of secondary compounds in response to environmental stress. Mr. Martins, I would like to invite you to participate in the conference, Dr. Sofia finally announced, specifically to present your work on the panel on unconventional approaches in botanical research. I have no academic credentials, he replied. My work has not undergone formal peer review. That's precisely why. Your perspective is valuable, the scientist insisted. Academia needs to recognize that valid knowledge exists beyond our formal structures. That chance encounter instantly transformed the project's credibility. From a condescendingly tolerated blind gardener, Antonio became an innovative researcher invited to an international conference. Laura arrived at the construction site early that morning. She found Antonio already working, kneeling near a central flower bed. Something wrong? She asked, noticing his concentrated expression. These aren't the plants we specified, he replied without hesitation. They look like ordinary lavender, but they're not. The texture of the leaves is different, and the aroma has chemical notes that shouldn't be present. Laura frowned, kneeling beside him. To her eyes, the plants looked exactly like the French lavenders he'd specified. Are you sure? Visually, they look identical. Absolute. This is Lavandula X intermedia, a commercial hybrid. We specified Lavandula angustifolia hidcoat blue for its aromatic profile that complements the adjacent salvias. This hybrid has compounds that chemically interfere with the surrounding plants. Laura walked around the garden, examining other areas. With Antonio's guidance, she discovered that several species had been subtly replaced with varieties that were visually similar, but aromatically incompatible with the planned design. This was no accident, she concluded. Someone deliberately replaced specific plants with varieties that would look correct to the naked eye, but would compromise the overall sensory experience. And they expected me not to notice the difference, Antonio added. When Deborah arrived for the staff meeting, she found Laura waiting in her office. We need to talk about plant replacements. The brief flash of alarm in Deborah's eyes confirmed all suspicions. What substitutions? Antonio identified at least 12 species that were replaced by visually similar varieties but incompatible with the planned aromatic design. Cornered, Deborah abandoned her pretense of innocence. It was necessary. This project is a threat to the company's survival. When it fails publicly, we can return to sanity. Sabotaging our own work? Laura asked incredulously. Betraying clients and employees? Being realistic. This fixation with your blind husband is destroying everything we've built. You are formally removed from the project, effective immediately, Laura declared. Marcelo will temporarily assume your responsibilities while our legal department prepares the dissolution of the partnership. The incident, though traumatic, had an unexpected consequence. It unified the team like never before. Employees who had remained neutral during previous conflicts now fully aligned themselves with the project, outraged by the sabotage. Helena watched discreetly from afar. She had arrived intending to confront Laura, but something held her back. His brother-in-law worked patiently with Juon, the young landscaper, teaching him how to identify signs of stress in plants. The young man had made a mistake in spacing, something that would have resulted in a severe reprimand. Instead, he observed a completely different interaction. "Don't worry," Antonio said gently. "We all make mistakes, especially when we're learning. The point isn't to avoid mistakes altogether, but to acknowledge them and correct them with respect, both for the plant and for ourselves." Helena remained motionless, the words echoing unexpectedly. Flexibility, not rigidity. Adaptation, not imposition. Principles she had forgotten since the death of Roberto, her husband. Roberto had never demonstrated such patience. His leadership model was based on inflexible authority and constant criticism. Helena had adopted this model, imposing it not only on herself, but on the entire family. The scene before her cracked something fundamental in her worldview. What if true? Strength lay not in inflexibility, but in the ability to bend without breaking, like the plants Antonio so clearly understood. Meanwhile, the Centennial Flower Festival was opening its doors. The Jardins Vivos sensory garden had been given the least privileged location, a secluded area far from the main entrance. This positioning seemed designed to minimize the impact of the eccentric project. On the first day, few visitors ventured into the sensory garden, but something extraordinary began to happen. A blind woman, accompanied by her teenage daughter, was one of the first visitors. Antonio personally guided them through the space. "I've never experienced a garden designed with people like me in mind," she commented emotionally. "Here, for the first time, I feel like the space was created with my experience as equally valuable." A group of occupational therapists discovered the garden and were fascinated by its potential applications for patients with various sensory challenges. The most surprising reaction was from visitors without any sensory impairment. A middle-aged woman, after experiencing the progressive aroma tunnel, left visibly moved. "I closed my eyes as suggested in the introduction, and it was as if a completely new sense opened up. I'd never paid attention to how smells tell stories, evoke memories, and create almost tangible physical sensations." Visitors began enthusiastically recommending the garden. By the end of the third day, the sensory garden had become the festival's most talked-about attraction. Lines formed to enter the space, which limited the number of visitors at a time to preserve the immersive experience. Festival organizers, initially uncomfortable with the eccentric concept, now faced a dilemma: how to accommodate the growing flow of visitors in an area purposefully positioned to minimize attention. The Centennial Flower Festival awards ceremony always took place on the penultimate day, with an elegant reception. The magnificent glass hall of the Municipal Botanical Garden was packed to capacity. Laura and Antonio sat in the designated living gardens area, accompanied by Marcelo, Teresa, João, and other team members. Despite the sensory garden's success with the public, no one had any illusions about the awards. The technical jury would likely favor conventional approaches. "At most, maybe we'll get some honorable mention," Marcelo commented discreetly. The master of ceremonies took the stage, kicking off the event. The secondary categories were announced first, all won by technically impeccable and visually stunning projects. Finally, it was time for the main award, Excellence in Landscape Design. This year, the jury faced an unprecedented challenge, announced the chairman of the judging panel. "We were confronted with a proposal that fundamentally challenged our conceptions of what constitutes exceptional landscape design." A murmur ran through the room. Laura felt Antonio gently squeeze her hand. "Traditionally, we evaluate gardens primarily for their visual impact. This year, however, a project forced us to expand our criteria, to recognize that excellence can manifest itself through multiple sensory dimensions. The winner of the Excellence in Landscape Design category at this year's Centennial Flower Festival is the Jardins Vivos Sensory Garden, designed by Antonio Martins." The team erupted in celebration. Antonio remained silent, a look of astonishment on his face. "Is it true?" he asked Laura softly. "Did we really win?" "Yes," she replied, guiding him onto the stage. "We won. You won." On stage, Antonio was invited to say a few words. "This award represents more than personal recognition. It represents a moment of transformation in the way we perceive and value experiences different from our own. For years, I've been working on research into how plants communicate. Losing my sight hasn't limited this work. Indeed, it's given me insights I otherwise wouldn't have discovered. The sensory garden is just the prototype of a larger project, a thesis on sensory inclusive design. I am honored that the Federal University has recognized this work by offering me a position as an associate researcher. This revelation, that Antonio had received a formal offer for an academic position, was news even to Laura. When they returned to the table, Laura found Helena waiting for them. Her expression no longer held its usual hardness. "I came to congratulate you," she said. "Your garden is extraordinary, Antonio. I visited it yesterday and again today. It's transformative." The recognition, coming from the man who had been his most relentless critic, meant almost as much as the official award. Antonio smiled, extending his hand to his sister-in-law. "Thank you, Helena. Your opinion means a lot to me, and to Laura." Helena hesitated briefly before accepting the outstretched hand. The contact, though brief, symbolized the beginning of a reconciliation that had seemed impossible months before. 2 months after the festival, life had found new balance. Jardins Vivos had expanded to include a division specializing in sensory design, led by Antonio in partnership with Teresa. Antonio divided his time between the company and the university, where his pioneering work attracted growing interest from the scientific community. His Braille notebooks were being digitized and translated for publication. At home, the garden they had created together flourished. Camellias, viburnums, and poet's jasmine, winter flowers Antonio had insisted on including, filled the air with delicate fragrances even on the coldest days. The house had become a genuine home, where every element held emotional meaning. One Sunday morning, Laura woke up feeling strangely different. Mild nausea, unusual sensitivity to scents, persistent fatigue. It was Helena, during a reconciliation lunch, who first verbalized the possibility. "You look different," her sister observed. "Your face is softer, brighter, and this is the 3rd time you've refused coffee." She hesitated. "Laura, have you considered the possibility that you might be pregnant?" The suggestion seemed absurd at first. Years ago, doctors had told Laura that her chances of natural conception were slim. At 43, the possibility seemed even more remote. The next morning, Laura bought a pregnancy test. When the 2 lines appeared in the result window, she stood motionless in absolute shock. He showed the test to Antonio with trembling hands. Are we having a baby?" he asked, the words barely above a whisper. When Laura confirmed it, silent tears streamed down his face. His hands rested gently on her still flat belly, as if trying to connect with the unexpected miracle. The news spread quickly through the family. Helena's reaction surprised everyone. Her older sister wept openly with joy. In a moment of rare vulnerability, she asked Laura for forgiveness. "I was so wrong about everything. About Antonio, about his marriage, about what really matters." The first trimester of pregnancy coincided with autumn, a time of planning for new professional projects. Laura and Antonio were working on an expanded vision, a spin-off company focused on inclusive landscaping for public and therapeutic spaces. Sensory Gardens, Antonio proposed for the name, creating spaces that can be genuinely experienced by everyone. When spring arrived, the home garden exploded with color and, fragrance. Antonio had selected each species not only for its scent and texture, but also for its specific symbolic meanings, flowers that represented love overcoming obstacles, beauty transcending limitations. Many of those who had laughed or shown pity during the marriage gradually returned, apologizing. Laura accepted each reconciliation with grace, without rancor. She had learned that, like plants after pruning, relationships could regenerate stronger. As she watched Antonio work in the garden, his hands moving with precision among the plants they cultivated, Laura reflected on the journey of the past 10 months. The cost had been immense: lost contracts, public humiliation, temporarily severed relationships. But what they gained, a partner who truly saw her even without physically seeing her, renewed purpose, family reconciliation, and the child growing inside her, was worth infinitely more than any price paid. "What are you thinking about?" Antonio asked, approaching silently, noticing her presence by her scent. How life finds unexpected paths, she replied, guiding his hand to her belly, where the baby had just moved. How sometimes we need to lose something to gain completely new perspectives. Antonio smiled. You know what I learned from plants? That sometimes what seems like loss is just transformation. The seed needs to burst for the plant to emerge. The flower needs to wither for the fruit to form. Laura nodded, understanding those words deeply. Her life had blossomed in ways she never imagined, precisely because she had had the courage to break through the shell of expectations and prejudices, allowing something new and unexpectedly beautiful to emerge.